it's October, and yes, I am wearing a Hawaiian shirt. Anyway, before we get started on today's podcast, which is a really good one with Aaron Shelby, wanted to let you know that today's show is brought to you by Arango Insurance Services. Arango Insurance Services is your traditional home auto commercial insurance brokerage that specializes in providing insurance to the automotive industry, from exotics to collector cars, private collections to insuring automotive OEM repair shops, restoration shops, automotive componentry manufacturers. We even insure dealerships, used cars, new car dealerships. We write with many of the top insurance companies and carriers, and we can customize our policies to fit your needs. So check us out, Arango Insurance Services, at www.arangoins.com, or call us at 949-887-1274. Again, Arango Insurance Services. Stay tuned to this podcast. It's really good. You're really going to enjoy it. Thanks. Everybody, welcome to Ed's Auto Garage. Again, this is Ed Arango coming to you like I always do from my garage here in sunny Southern California, Huntington Beach. And today I've got a special guest. I'm really honored to have him on. And I think it'd be really interesting to majority of our listeners. And if you're anywhere, well, geez, I don't even want to say my age or older. I mean, even if you're like in your 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s, I think you'll enjoy this guest. Today's guest is Aaron Shelby. Aaron is Carroll Shelby's grandson. Is that right, Aaron?
Yes, I'm one of 6 grandchildren. I'm the oldest of the 6.
Oh, you're the oldest of the 6. Okay, great. So yeah, everybody, welcome Aaron to the show. Thank you so much for being here and participating with me on this.
Definitely, Ed. I'm happy to be here. Look forward to it.
Thank you, man. Hey, so and a couple of things, just kind of did you happen to be at Monterey just a couple of weeks ago?
I was just during the historics and all that.
Yeah,
mm-hmm.
Right. Because Ford was highlighted at the show, and I could have sworn you must. Do you have a son? Maybe about, I don't know, 10, 12?
No, my 2 boys are 15 and 17, but they were not with me this year. They've been out there with me before, but they couldn't make it this year.
They couldn't make it this. Okay, because I could have sworn I saw you. I was walking around. I was there with one of my boys. You know, my little boys are really little. They're 25 and 28 now. So, but my 25 they both love going, and I drove up in my we drove up in my Alpha, which is a Spider 2-seater convertible, so only one got to go. So the one that picked the small straw got to go, and we drove up, and as you know, I'm sure you've been to the West Coast many a times. It can get kind of brutally hot out here. So I was no air conditioning, just kicking my butt driving over there, so it got kind of brutal on the way up and on the way back. But yeah, I think I saw you walking around. I wasn't 100% sure, so I didn't want to come bug you, but I think you were walking around. I think you had some credentials hanging. So
Probably so. Yeah, I was out there from I think Wednesday to Sunday this year.
And at the track as well?
For the track, days? I was there on, Thursday and Saturday. I was out at the track Thursday and Saturday.
So then it was Saturday I saw you, because we were there at the track on Saturday, and they had a nice display, and I think they had some stuff honoring your granddad out there, in respect to his involvement with Ford. Hey, so just to get people a little bit of idea of what you're doing and how your involvement is with all things Carroll Shelby at this point. Let's kind of go back a little bit and just kind of get a little idea of about you, Aaron, about where you grew up, how your life was as a kid.
Sure.
Yeah. How was all
Yeah, so
that?
I was, I actually just turned 50 about a couple weeks ago. So I was born in 1971, born in Dallas. That's where Carroll was actually from originally. He went to high school here and then the Air Corps and moved out to Southern California in the early 60s. But yes, we grew up around here primarily. My father actually moved us out. We lived in LA for a little bit when I was younger. He had a wheel manufacturing company in Gardena, and he and Carroll did that as a partnership. And then we moved back to Dallas in the mid 80s. And so I've been here since middle school for the most part, and high school here. I went to college out in Northern California, Santa Clara University. I graduated in 1994. Great spot up there, and love to visit California every chance I get. Still have a lot of friends both in North and South there.
So that was Santa Clarita?
Santa Clara.
Oh, Santa Clara. Okay.
Yeah, so right there next to the San Jose Airport, Santa Clara University, Jesuit school that's there. So
Right.
it was really a great time out there and a good education as well. So it's always fun for me to get back to California when I can. So I came in and I graduated in '94, came back to Dallas and got into banking here in Dallas and did that, and then a couple other jobs. I actually wound up owning my own business for about 4 years called Mr. Brackett. We sold auto accessories into Pep Boys and O'Reilly's and Walmart and various other retailers like that. And sold that in late 2003, and then joined up with another bank here in town in Dallas. It was actually owned by my family. So my grandmother was an original shareholder, and my father was chairman at the time. So Carroll's youngest son, Patrick, who's my dad. And so I joined that bank, and I'm still here today as a full-time career. I do some other things on the side. One of them is I get to be on the board of Carroll Shelby International and represent Shelby around at different events, which is a great honor for me. So it's really a lot of fun for me to do this, and not just the events and meeting the people and being around the cars, but I work heavily with the Ford relationship in Shelby and what we're doing with Ford and developing those things that we do out of Las Vegas in addition to what Ford's working on. So it's a lot of fun for me to have that involvement.
Yeah, and I just wanted to give you a little hi from Renee in Mexico City.
Oh yeah, sure.
Yep. I was chit-chatting with him earlier today. He told me, I told him that you and I'd be talking. He said, tell him hi for me. So
yes,
so
most definitely. He's a good member of Team Shelby, our enthusiast club. So
good deal. Hey, so your family life growing up, I mean, were you kind of, I mean, did you know what the name Shelby really kind of represented in the car industry from a young age? Or was it just like, hey, I'm a kid and I'm riding my bike and just playing and I didn't really get it yet?
Yeah, it was a little bit of a mix. So born in '71, so Carroll wasn't in the car business for that whole decade of the '70s. So as I got to know him, as my grandfather, I knew he liked to play golf and he traveled around the world doing whatever he was doing, which at that time was a lot of going to Africa and going on safaris and just other stuff. He started the Carroll Shelby chili mix company in the '70s, and really nothing car related at all. When I was 8 years old, though, my dad started racing Formula Fords when he lived in Southern California, and so that was my introduction into really loving racing and cars, and subsequently kind of learned through friends of dad's and others that I ran into more about Carroll's history. And then in the early 80s, when Carroll joined Lee Iacocca over at Chrysler, that's when I really started to pick up on what his history was, because all of a sudden he was on the front of magazine covers again. And, can Shelby come in and help Lee save Chrysler and Dodge, et cetera? And so each of those articles started off with a bit of his history from the 60s. He did this back in the 60s with the Mustangs and the Cobras. Can this be repeated with Dodge and Chrysler? So that got me more interested.
So was the house, I mean, did you guys have like Cobras and Shelbys around the house? I mean, as cars?
Not at all. No, Carroll really, around our house, no. Carroll really didn't have much of anything either, because he basically was rich and poor a lot in his life, and he'd sell all his cars, and then when he'd get money again, he'd buy a lot of cars again. And so it just depended on when you caught him in life on what he was doing. And I was always more interested in Dad's race car, quite frankly. When they had the wheel company in Gardena, he'd keep the race car back in the warehouse, and he had a couple of guys that would help him work on it. So to me, that was always the draw of going back there. And Carroll had his large office back there as well, and I'd like to go sit back there and he had pictures of all kinds of stuff from around the world, but there wasn't really any, I'd say, hard memorabilia. There weren't cars, Cobras or Mustangs just sitting around to look at. A lot of that came later on in life.
Got it. So, and how many brothers and sisters are you guys?
I've got 2 younger brothers, and then I've got 3 cousins. So Carroll had 3 kids, Sharon, Mike, and Patrick. My dad's Patrick, he's the youngest. And then I've got 2 younger brothers than me.
And are your brothers also involved in the
Not quite as much as I am. Both of them have a passion for it, for sure. Neither of them are engaged as much as I am, but they do like going to events, and they do like representing the family and the brand as well. Just didn't jump in quite like I did when the opportunity arose a number of years ago, but they definitely have a passion for it.
Did you find yourself as a young kid kind of being attracted to the auto space? Was it something that kind of came natural to you, or was it just because now you saw your dad racing and the wheel shop and all that stuff?
Yes, it was great for me. I really, once Dad started racing, and then they wound up having some support races with sports cars and running in, and I still remember the first time I saw a BMW M1 out at Riverside. I mean, that was just the most gorgeous sports car that I think I'd seen at that point in time. So it was fantastic.
Right.
And that just led into getting all the car magazines I could get, following all the racing I could. And then again, when Carroll joined with Dodge, all of a sudden he's in the magazines reading about his cars, and it was just a good springboard. Like I said, I was 8 when Dad started, and it just grew from there.
Did you ever say to your dad Patrick, hey, I want to get involved in racing at some point or anything like that?
Oh yes, most definitely. And he told me the same thing Carroll told him. He said, when you can afford to do it on your own, you can do it.
Oh, wow. Interesting. Very cool.
So I never, and to be honest, I love to get out on the track and do some time. And I've been to the Bondurant school a couple of times and really enjoyed that. I am 6'3", so I don't fit in formula cars well, and I really don't fit in vintage cars very well.
Yeah.
But I also realized after going to school a couple of times and having some track time with a bunch of people on the track, I like watching racing more than I like being in the middle of a race.
Sure.
So it's just, and again, I love to do some track laps and see what kind of times I can do and the skill and all that involved in that. But I don't have the same constitution for it that Dad and Carroll had, for sure.
Was Carroll, I guess Carroll was a tall guy, wasn't he?
He was probably 6'1", pushing 6'2" at the time, and super skinny. He was probably 160 or something. I mean, he was a pretty skinny guy went back in the 50s. So he was tall. You look at him in pictures, and I've got one up on my screen above me here, but he's in his DBR1 at Goodwood, and his head is up here. I mean, there's no roll bar back then, but still, there was no protection for him, and he's looking well above any windshield that he ever had. So it was always a squeeze for him, and that's what I could never figure out with the Cobras when they did them, why they didn't stretch them just a little bit more, because even today I can't fit in a Cobra real well, a vintage one. So
no, I can imagine. So I mean, so there seems to be so many kind of like little offshoots of continuation cars or tribute cars or kit cars, I guess you could say. I know like there's like the Superformance guys, and then you got the Factory 5 guys, I guess it is.
Yep.
Is that what they're called? Factory 5? Yeah, that's Factory 5.
Yeah, Factory 5. There's a number of them that are out there, and it was interesting. Carroll was always a look forward person. He never really looked back. And so when all that was done in the 60s and he got into the 70s, that was the history. He wasn't, there wasn't any, and it wasn't that he wasn't proud, but there wasn't any thought of, well, I need to keep ownership of this, or I need to watch what's going on. So when the kit cars started coming out in the 80s, he thought nothing of it at all. He was like, well, why does anybody want an old car? I mean, the new cars are so much better. Who's going to do that? But as that industry continued to grow and the popularity, particularly of the Cobra kit cars, grew, he saw an avenue for himself to get into that as well. So it started off slowly in the 90s for him. I couldn't give you a head count on the number of kit car makers out there at the time. There was a lot. But he did own the intellectual property that was the Cobra design. And so he started to sue all those folks and really try and tamp down on particularly using the Cobra name and the Shelby symbols and like that they were doing, and so got a lot of that to stop. If you fast forward to today, what we do is we actually partner with Superformance. They're our Cobra partner. So if you want a licensed Shelby Cobra today, Superformance puts that together for you. It's a Superformance package, and there's certain things that go into that package to make it a Shelby. Most people want their Cobra replicas to be fairly authentic to the 60s, and so that's a lot of what we build that around to get your CSX number. You can certainly go buy a Superformance Cobra on its own that's more modern mechanicals, modern brakes, modern engine and all that, and that's fine. And they do that on their own. But if you want a licensed Cobra today through Shelby, it comes out of the Superformance shop.
Yeah, and that's a hats off to Lance and his group over there at Superformance, and here in Southern California, a good buddy of mine is Doug Campbell.
Oh, sure. Yeah,
so,
that's right.
Yeah, Doug's a good guy, and so yeah, that's good to hear. So the facility, I believe, is there still a facility in Las Vegas?
Yeah, so I call it our world headquarters for lack of a better term, but the Shelby shop is in Las Vegas. It's south of the Strip a little bit, just south of the Valley High Golf Course there. We moved there about 5, maybe 6 years ago now. Been a great move. Up until that point, they were up at the Speedway, which was fairly far out of town. Mm-hmm. I think it was a good launching point back in the mid-'90s when Carroll moved everything out there, but over time, for the foot traffic that we wanted, it was just too far to go. You're talking a $60+ cab ride each way, and that's just not easy to get to. So this location that we've got now is a $5 to $10 Uber ride. A lot of times some hotels will run shuttles down there, and you walk in, there's a retail store. We've got our heritage center, so you can see a lot of Shelby history there. And then you can take tours and see the shop in the back where we do the Shelby conversions as well.
So it's kind of a museum in its own right.
You got it. Although we can't technically call it a museum because of zoning in Las Vegas. So it's a heritage center.
Heritage center. Okay, gotcha. That's good. That's good. Yeah. So, everybody that's into cars is going to have or will be seeing or has seen the movie. All right, mm-hmm. that was out about 2 years ago, and yep. How involved were you? Were you asked to be on and help with the movie in any way, or?
So we were not as a family. We offered both company and family wise on the front end of it. They're like, no, we're covered. They actually did bring Charlie Agapu in, who's Ken Miles' mechanic and who's still pretty active in the racing and vintage world right now as a consultant because he lived through all that stuff, and I think that was good. I don't think the studio totally knew what they had when they got it. James Mangold did a great job of getting the studio to buy off on the vision and the design and the budget, so I think that was good on his part. But I don't think the studio fully understood, as us coming from the outside and saying, hey, we would like to help on this. They didn't really know how to take that. And so a no was an easier answer. Now, fast forward, film's done. They're starting to do marketing for it. They're starting to do TV shows and get appearances. Then they reached out and said, Shelby, we would actually like to have you involved. You've got this huge Team Shelby Club. You've got other Shelby clubs around the country and around the world. It would be a great way to help promote the movie for us. You've got, Aaron Shelby. You've got actually living family members as well that are still here. Maybe we can get them in the loop. So I actually did a lot of interviews. My brother, Randall, did some interviews, and we helped as much as we could where they wanted, and it was fun. We actually got to go to the red carpet premiere. I actually got to go out to the Fox Studios about 4 months before the movie came out to see a preview of it, which was nice. And they were really interested in the feedback that we had on it. So I was impressed with that, and they treated us great. And in general, I thought they did a great job of telling the story. I think it just was a very engaging story from a people perspective and drew in a much larger crowd than I think anybody anticipated.
Yeah, I really do think the same. I think that in general, the film industry was kind of at a point where they needed a car focused film to be out at this period of time, because it had been some time, maybe since Ron Howard did Rush a couple of years before that. And so a car movie was I think in a timely, set up timely for the film. I think also that that there was just a ton of people that just didn't understand what was going on with your grandfather during that period of time, and and how close they got to absorbing Ferrari, you know,
Yes,
and
definitely.
you think about how that could have just changed the whole game all the way
Yeah,
across.
it would
Um,
have been just totally different how things turned out. Yeah, along those lines is what I found interesting. Carroll joined back with Ford around 2003, 2004, with the first modern Ford Shelby Mustang being in '07. And so you've got this whole new generation of people that have been impassioned with Shelby through the newer Ford Shelby products. And we get a lot of them at team events and a lot of the club events around the country. And a lot of them really didn't know that story from the 60s. They knew the modern story, so to speak, and they knew a little bit of, Carroll made these cars back in the 60s, but a lot of them really didn't know the racing history and what that Cobra did and what the Shelby American team did through that, 5 to 6 year period in the 60s.
Hey, Aaron, thinking back when your grandfather first started, I'm sure you know how it all panned out, but when he first kind of started, he was just kind of like an independent driver. He would just try and find a drive wherever he got back. I would assume back in the late 50s or in the
Yeah,
50s.
so he started 1952 was his first race, and he just basically hopped in a buddy's car at a race in Oklahoma and did well. Um, Back then, obviously, there wasn't much money in it, so
Sure.
he did a couple others, and somebody said, "Hey, you come up to Milwaukee and do a race, and then you come over here and do a race." And so he was just kind of a for hire driver at that point in time. Aston Martin caught wind of him, and he went over and was a factory driver for a year in Europe, and I think it was '54, and then came back here and had a bunch of success racing Maseratis and Ferraris in '56 and '57, and become the U.S. champion. Went back to Europe and was the Aston Martin factory driver again in '58 and '59, and then had the great success, obviously, of winning the 24 hours as a driver in '59 with Aston Martin.
Was
Um,
during that period of time, I don't know, I'm forgetting now, but during that period of time was SECA around already or no?
yeah, SCCA had started kind of that early '50s, I believe. So
Okay.
about the same time he was kind of getting up and going. There were some more regional organizations prior to that, and they kind of became more of a national organization in the early '50s. So they were starting to put on races, and they had the SCCA regionals, and so that was a lot of what was there. It was still amateur racing, but you would have some little, maybe the top three guys would get a little bit of money or something, but it wasn't a whole lot.
Yeah,
It
I
was
mean,
mainly gentleman drivers.
I can't imagine how he was surviving. I
Yeah,
mean, financially, I mean, that's going to be tough,
yeah.
during that period of time for him.
Well, you had some of the guys like Tony Paravano and Guyverson, and those guys they were large, wealthy guys with car collections, and so they would hire Carroll, and they would hire the drivers, and so they would get paid regardless of where they finished. They'd probably get a little extra if they won and things like that. So there was some way to earn a little living that way, but you weren't getting rich off of it like you could in any kind of sports today. I mean, it's like all sports back then. Nobody really got rich off of sports back in the '50s. So
Yeah, exactly. No, exactly. No, I hear you. Um, so I guess that in a nutshell, I mean, Carroll kind of fell into this. I mean, I'm sure he definitely had a passion for automobiles and cars and all of that, but he was a businessman too. So I mean, I'm sure that his head, if if he got into you know plane flying or whatever, some other
yeah.
industry, he probably would have continued down that other industry path and not necessarily be in the auto business at the time.
I think that's correct. He joined the Air Corps right out of high school in 1940. He became a pilot through World War II. And that, again, just goes back to more of his love of speed. You brought up planes, but he just loved speed. And so he would, race buddies' cars around in high school, just, through the streets like all the kids did. But I think flying planes was a passion for him, and probably more of a passion than cars was ultimately. But he made his mark in the car world, both racing and later constructing cars. And so at the end of the day, he was really just an entrepreneur. I mean, he did so
Mm-hmm.
many things through his life, a lot of them unsuccessfully, but he caught lightning in a bottle, I like to say a few times, and it was just what was the next deal. Before he started racing cars, he had a string of failed businesses that just didn't make it for various reasons, and so he just kind of kept trying. He wasn't real good at working for other people. He knew that. So it was what could he go out and do on his own and figure out. And so the racing career kind of helped that. And then 1960 came and he was having his heart problems. And so that was the last year of his driving career. His doctor told him he couldn't race any longer. So that threw him for a loop because he was really just hitting the peak of his game, having won Le Mans and really getting some worldwide recognition. And then all of a sudden you're told you can't do this anymore. So then what was he going to do? So.
When you knew him, later in life, I mean, did a couple of things. One, did you later in life, did he still fly planes and enjoy that as well?
He did. So he always had several airplanes. He would go out and fly quite a bit. My dad, when I was younger, had a pilot's license, so we would go out and ride around with him a little bit. But he always talked about planes. He always kept up with the kind of latest technology in planes. Ultimately, it got to where in 1990, when he had his heart transplant, his doctors, he couldn't have his pilot's license anymore, essentially. Didn't necessarily stop him from flying, but it curtailed his flying quite a bit. But again, he just liked to try new things. He has a farm in East Texas, a couple hours from Dallas here, and he always talked about getting these ultralight gliders. He wanted to have ultralight gliders and go fly them around above the trees and look at the different pastures and things like that. And just that flying always fascinated him.
Do you think that he saw things kind of from like from an engineering perspective, mechanical things from an engineering perspective, or did he kind of look at things more from a salesman's perspective? Like, how can I move this piece of product, or how can I convince others to buy this piece of product?
That's a really good question. I really think it's a bit of both. He was the ultimate salesman, if you ask anybody that worked with him long enough. He wasn't an engineer by trade. He wasn't going to get in and deconstruct an engine and put it back together, but he understood how it worked. Mm-hmm. And so for him, it was, what can we do to make this a little better? Can you bore out the inside a little bit more? Can you enlarge the cylinders? Can you, cut the stroke or enlarge the stroke a little bit? I mean, he knew the functions of what was going on, didn't necessarily know how to get it to go there, but he also knew how to find the right people that could get it to go where his vision wanted it to go, if that makes sense. And that's where I go back to him being an entrepreneur. He wasn't necessarily a specialist at something training-wise, but he had a mind for a lot of different things, and his mind was always working and always coming up with new ideas.
So he had one of his early shops like in North Hollywood or something like that, or in Van Nuys, that area, the valley up there?
The 1042 Princeton in Venice was his really one of the early shops. He started actually out of Dean Moon's shop, was where the first Cobra was put together. That was fairly short-lived just from a size perspective. But wound up taking over Lance Raventlow's, Lance had the Scarab car company, and he was shutting that down and wound up taking over Lance's shop. And that's actually where he got several of his first employees as well, Phil Remington being one of them.
So the Scarabs were Corvettes, weren't they? Kind of converted?
No, they were ground up race cars that Lance Raventlow built. Now he had Chevy engines, I believe he used, but they were not Corvettes.
Oh, okay. So, yeah, because they were long and kind of bubbly in the back and long. Yep. Yeah. Very, very E-type-ish looking to me.
A little bit, yes.
Yeah. Uh-huh. Yeah. Okay. I didn't realize that. I thought they were like a body put onto a Corvette.
No, it was all new underpinnings. It was a whole new deal. They had several variations of them, some for sports car racing, and then he actually had his own Formula One car for a number of years as well. I don't think it did super well, but he was more of an engineer wanting to try that stuff out. So when he came time to shut his shop up, that was about the time Carroll was starting up the Cobra program, and so he took that shop over, and like I said, a few of the employees.
Hey, here's a question that it wasn't addressed, like, for example, like for anybody else, it wasn't addressed in the movie or anything like that, but his involvement with Sunbeam, and when the Tiger came out, how did that all come to play? I mean, I'm sure he was trying to find a little car to do something with.
Yeah, and I think I don't have all the details on how it materialized. I know, it had to do with Ford's 289 engine. What we put this in to make it work. And so I think when the Sunbeam was being worked on there, they had approached Carroll about helping out with that program, and so he had that run of them where he put the little 289 in there, and it worked out well. It just wasn't quite what they were going for, and what the Cobra was ultimately going to be.
Right. Yeah. Because that was 66, 60. I think
It was a little later.
Yeah, 66, 67, I think. And then Chrysler ended up taking it, and it was kind of funny because, Chrysler had the Sunbeam Tiger car owned by Chrysler, but it still had a Ford engine in it, which was, and then
Yeah,
they
it was
stopped it.
a little strange.
Yeah, it was a little weird at that time. Um, tell us a little bit more about Aaron Shelby now. I mean, okay,
Sure.
I'm assuming that all the Shelby auto side of it is kind of um a side job for you. It's maybe a hobby for you. I don't know how that all plays out for you.
No, so as I mentioned, I'm a banker by day here, and so I've been doing this for about 18 years, and it's the job that pays the bills, and I actually have a good passion for banking here. It's a lot of fun dealing with my clients and my team here. But I got involved really more directly with Shelby after Carroll passed, and Ford was rolling out the new GT350 at the time, so it was about 2014, and they were doing an unveiling, and they asked about having a Shelby representative there. And the two folks that are co-CEOs of Shelby are not necessarily face people. They don't want to be out in front doing that type of thing. And so they all called and said, hey, do you mind coming out to LA? They're going to unveil the new GT350, and they'd like to have you. And wound up having Henry Ford III there. So the two of us are kind of this generation, which was a lot of fun. And I really had a good time with that. And then that kind of led to, well, do you mind coming back in a couple of days to do this? And then do you mind doing this? And I was like, well, if I can get the time for it, I'm having a lot of fun with it. I mean, the one thing for me, while I always had a passion for it, it was always Carroll's business. There wasn't like, I'm going to hand this off to the next generation. It was just Carroll's business. And the way he set his whole estate up, we don't, family-wise, we don't own anything today of that. It's all set up in a trust that operates for the ongoing business, the foundation, et cetera. So, it was a neat way for me to get an entry into this world that I've always been fascinated with. And so that's what kind of led to me then getting on the board of Carroll Shelby International and joining the board of the Carroll Shelby Foundation. And so that's really my official role in the day-to-day world, but I act more as a brand ambassador if we're at Monterey or if we're at doing a Team Shelby event or if we're doing an unveiling with Ford. And then I usually come in to represent the Shelby brand with that. So it's a lot of fun for me, but it is a passion. It's a side job, and I try and minimize my travel away as much as possible. I've got two kids that are in high school and my wife here, and so I've got to have family time, and it's a lot of juggling for sure.
Yeah,
no, I like
it. Did your dad, was your dad involved with any part of the aspect of the company while him being in his teenage years or anything like that?
Not as much. Most of that had shut down. So he and his brother both went out to USC about 1967, I think it was, 66 maybe. And so the whole Shelby portion of Los Angeles was kind of wrapping up just as they were getting into college. And so it wasn't that it was gone, but they were still getting an education and doing that. So they definitely had some fun with it and whatnot. But by the time they got out of school in 1970, 71, that was all gone. Carroll wouldn't do anything in the car world anymore. And so they all kind of, my dad and his brother went their separate ways and their own businesses, and et cetera. So there really wasn't anything there. A number of years later, Carroll and Dad partnered up for the Carroll Shelby Wheel Company, which was in Southern California. And so we manufactured, I think they were one of the first in the country to manufacture aluminum wheels here. And so they started that business up, and it went real well for 10 or 12 years.
So the wheels, would they be like what you would see? I'm trying to envision the rims. Would they be wheels like what you would see like what do they call like, I guess they have one that's called like the wine glass rim that the spokes were kind of like the original old Shelby rims?
Not as much. No, it was a little more modern than that because it was aluminum and they were all molded formed. They did aftermarket through Pep Boys and some of the catalog companies and things like that. And then their volume stuff was with General Motors, and they actually sold a bunch through Gulf States Toyota at the time. So the Toyotas would come over from Japan with ugly little steel wheels on them, and then they put the Shelby wheels on them to dress them up a little bit more. And so there was I don't know, hundreds probably of designs of wheels that they came up with through the years, but it was really a more high performance looking wheel and the genesis of the aluminum wheel revolution.
Yeah,
So you didn't have hubcaps, you didn't have the spokes on them anymore like you did back in the 30s and 40s, and so it was just a modern technique. And really, you wound up seeing them in a lot of different places.
So they would probably around the same time that Kreger and US Mag and all those guys were kind of coming
Correct.
up.
Yep,
Yeah,
that's exactly right.
yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense.
So, but they did that, but they were really, again, Carroll wasn't in the car business at that point, and he wasn't super engaged in that business because he was doing other things. It was more of kind of licensing his name and leveraging his contacts back in Detroit to help out with that. And then he got back with Chrysler in the 80s, and Dad kept the wheel business going until about 86 or 87, and then they sold that and did pretty well with it. And then Dad, we were back here, and he got into the banking business and a couple other things. Family-wise today, we're in real estate and oil and gas and a bunch of other industries as well. So that's kind of my third side job.
Jeez, that's all you need.
Yeah.
Hey, so when Carroll got in with Chrysler, was that still with Iacocca? Was that with Lee Iacocca at the time?
Exactly when Iacocca came in around, I think he came in 79 or 80, and he brought Carroll over there about 81. So
and they came out with that GHL or GLH little Omni car.
Oh yes, that was the second car out. The first one was actually the Charger, which was pretty popular, and then they had the GLH, which stood for Goes Like Hell, which was Carroll was always he always
like
thought
hell,
that was
right.
funny. So he always got a kick out of that. And they probably did 10 to 12 cars through that decade of the 80s, were Shelby branded cars, and then the last project he worked on there was the Viper. So it was a kind of good bookend for that career.
Hey, I'll tell you, in 1984, I had a Volkswagen GTI, which at the time was like the little pocket rocket car, and I thought it was the greatest thing in the world. And one of those GLHs came by me one time, and I was like, "Are you?" They look similar in body style, right?
Yeah.
So it was like, "Are you kidding me?" This thing was so fast in comparison to my Volkswagen, and it was like, I think they were even less money than what I paid for my Volkswagen at the time.
Yeah.
And I was like, and then that's when everybody started talking about that car, but then he moved on to make the other cars, but man, I remember that car.
Yeah, it was fun. We were about 5 or 6 years ago. I've got to do an episode with Jay Leno, which was a lot of fun. And so we went out to Willow Springs, and we had a Cobra replica out there, and we had a Mustang GT350 convertible, and then we had a Dodge Omni GLH. And so Jay spent the whole time in that car. He's like, this thing is just so much fun. You got this turbo kick that can drag at the wheels because it's front wheel drive. And he's like, we did, I don't know how many dozens of laps we did in that car, just talking about everything, and he loved it. So it was pretty funny. But
I can imagine. I can imagine that it was a fun little car to drive. So then, as he got out of the car, business per se, he got pulled in back with Lee Iacocca, and then he did all this, got to the Viper stage of it. Then he started getting into, like, was it Chili?
Well, the Chili started back in the early 70s.
Oh.
So he actually did that way back then. So back in the 60s, he had a large, I won't call it a ranch, he had a lot of empty land out in southwest Texas down by the New Mexican border. And so they actually started the original Terlingua chili cook-offs down there, he and his buddies. And they had a couple cabins down there, and people would fly their planes in and bring all their RVs and whatever, and they'd hang out down there for a week for this big chili cook-off. And so that kind of got him thinking, and so what he did was created Carroll Shelby Chili Mix, and it was at the time in a little brown bag, and it was all the mixings to make chili. It wasn't like in a can or something. So it was all the spices and things, and it gave you some directions on the side. You can make it spicier, not spicier. You can use ground beef. You could use whatever you want to use. They kind of gave you some guidelines, but it was basically, here's the basics. You go do what you want to do with it. And we did really well. It was in all kinds of grocery stores. Ultimately, he sold that to Kraft in the mid-'80s for a lot of money, and Kraft contracted him because he had the facility. He continued to produce it for them up until about 1994. And then Kraft sold it to somebody else, and they took over the production. So yeah, it was a 25-year run of making chili under a couple of different guises, and you can still find it in stores today. The company that bought it last, I think, still owns it, but it's now in a box instead of a little bag. But it's still find Carroll Shelby chili mix at the grocery store.
Wow, wow. I mean, it's kind of like Paul Newman's salad dressing in a sense.
Yep. And he'd had through the years, he had some cornbread mix at one point in time, and they've had a white chicken chili mix before, and so it had a couple offshoots as well that I think did pretty well. But the core chili mix is what still makes the money for the company that owns it today.
Well, I mean, it just goes to show, that what he really had was an entrepreneurial spirit in him to just kind of like what's next. He's always looking. He was always looking for what was next. And then they had that. I don't know if it was a prototype or what it was, but it was where he was working on a modern Cobra car. It was kind of round edged car.
The Shelby Series 1, I think, is what you're talking about. And so that started to draw its ideas out in kind of the mid-'90s after they moved to Las Vegas. And the funny part of that story is when he was leaving Dodge, I was bugging him. I was in the middle of college at that point in time. I'm like, you need to go build another, I saw the success of the Viper and kind of what that drew. I said, you need to go do another Cobra. And he just flat out, no, you can't do that. You just can't make money building one-off cars. It just doesn't work. You can't do it. So I stopped bugging him. And then like 2 years later, it's like, hey, I found a guy and we're going to build a new car. I'm like, but you said that doesn't work. He's like, oh, no, this guy's got it all figured out. It's like, we're going to do just fine with it. And, as much as Carroll was a salesman, he definitely could be sold by some people if he wanted to be. And so this guy kind of sold him a bill of goods. But ultimately, they followed through and they made 250 of the Shelby Series 1s.
They did.
They're basically all 1999 vintage model years. About 50 of them were supercharged, and the other 200 of them are normally aspirated. They used the old Aurora engine in it, which is a fantastic motor. I think what they were expecting was once they committed to that GM might help kick in a little more money for development and parts and whatnot, and they didn't. They basically kind of gave them a discount on the motors and said, good luck, see you later. So it was never a money-making opportunity for sure, a money-losing opportunity, if anything. But those are neat cars. It's a neat piece of Shelby history. We have one in our collection. Anytime you bring one out to a car show, really very few people have ever seen one.
Sure.
So they ask a lot of questions about it, and it's got neat lines to it, and it's a nice-looking vehicle. So
are they all the same color?
Originally, believe they were all silver. Some had stripes that were either maroon or blue. I think a couple of them had orange stripes. Subsequently, some people had painted them more Cobra looking like blue with white stripes and things like that. But coming out of the factory, everything was silver.
It was pretty much silver. So, yep. Aaron, tell us a little bit about some of the foundation and some of the other work you're doing, with the foundation.
Definitely. So Carroll had his heart transplant in 1990, and through that process and waiting for a heart, he really saw a lot of children that were having to go through transplants for various things, whether it was hearts or kidneys or whatnot, and just the suffering that they and their families were having. And so he immediately, as he was getting healthier, decided to start the Carroll Shelby Foundation around 1991. And so what he really wanted to do originally was called the Shelby Heart Fund, and he wanted to help fund heart transplants for kids. Well, they did a couple of those, but realized pretty quick those are very expensive, and you could do, under his guise and what they were doing from a fundraising perspective, you could do one, maybe two a year, and it just wasn't having a huge impact. So the foundation's morphed over time. He had a kidney transplant in 96, by the way, so two transplants in his lifetime, and just kind of, it gave him that passion still. So today what we have is the Carroll Shelby Foundation has really three main focuses. One is helping families go through transplant care. And we partner a lot with Children's Organ Transplant Association from Indianapolis. We provide funds to them every year. They have essentially a playbook. So if you're in Huntington Beach and your son has to get a kidney transplant, they're going to say, well, here's 3 hospitals that are in your vicinity that do that. And here's what you're going to have to go through. Here's the doctor visits, here's the physical therapy, here's the medication stream, here's everything, and lays out that foundation for you to say, okay, this is kind of a rule book or a guide for me to go use. Now think about this. You're in Los Angeles, I'm in Dallas. We have very strong medical facilities in both these locations. If you're in rural Eastern California or rural Western Texas, you're going to have to drive to Dallas or drive to Los Angeles, and that just makes it that much more difficult. Where do you stay while your child's going through this? And so CODA really helps with that. So we fund CODA because they have the infrastructure and the personnel in place to help guide these families through this process. So that's one of them.
You refer to it as CODA?
Yeah, so it's Children Organ Transplant Association.
Okay.
And they've been around, I'm going to say 30 years or more. But we partnered with them probably for the last 15 years at least, maybe a little longer than that. And so we do a lot jointly with them. The second piece of what the foundation focuses on, back at around 2005 or 6, near Carroll's hometown out in East Texas, there's the Northeast Texas Community College, and they had a kind of sleepy, failing automotive technical program. And so Carroll came in and said, look, I want to help the local community where I grew up. So he rebranded that part of the school, the Carroll Shelby Automotive Technical Training School, and we provide scholarship dollars for that school now. We really provided a lot of funding for that school to grow. The student base is fantastic there now, and it gives kids coming out of high school that don't want to get a 4-year degree the ability to do a 2-year technical degree with something that can earn good money coming out of that, whether it's at a discount tire, you're going to a race shop, or you're going somewhere else, you come to Dallas and work in a dealership. I mean, it's a high demand position today, given the technology that's in cars. And so that's been a lot of fun for me to be involved with because it's close by. I go out to the school on occasion. We always have students come out to Las Vegas to see Shelby and kind of interact there. We've gotten them internships with NASCAR teams before. We've had them out to work for a couple of weeks at Shelby in Vegas. We've had them visit with Ford people. And so we're trying to get them exposed to what the opportunities are out there. And then the third piece is the third piece is in Southern California, the Eli Home, which is a home for battered women. And that's just been something that Carroll and both Neil Cummings, one of the CEOs of Carroll Shelby International, have been close with for a long time. And so we provide some funds for the Eli Home as well.
Wow. This is great, you guys. So if they want to learn more, if somebody wants to learn more about the foundations, where's a good place? Is there a website or a source to go?
There is. So easiest place to go is shelby.com. And then there'll be a tab for the foundation on there, and you can read more about it, how we do fundraising, how we provide the funds out to the different organizations. A lot of what we've done the last few years, which has been successful, when we do Team Shelby enthusiast events in Kansas City or Pittsburgh or Northern California, a lot of times there's a transplant type hospital close by. And so we'll raise funds during our event that weekend and donate it to the local transplant hospital. And so that's another way to kind of get the brand out there and really help support local communities when we do events in those communities. So it's been well received, and it's a great way for us to give back and really support those families.
Wow, this is great. That's great. That's great to hear all that. That's fantastic. How about your kids? Are your kids interested in following in the Shelby legacy footsteps, involvement with the companies?
Yeah, it's interesting. They got to know Carroll before he passed away. We spent quite a bit of time with him in East Texas at his farm, and so they were little at the time. So they were passed away in 2012. So they were 6 and 8 when he passed away.
Sure.
But again, we've got a lot of photos with them together, and they remember spending time with him out there. So I think they've got that neat vision to have. They appreciate the history for sure. I've been able to take them to a lot of the different events to see the passion around Shelby. We've been to Lamar a couple of times, and I've taken, as I mentioned earlier, out to Monterey and different car events. And my older one is definitely a little more engaged with it, a little more interested. He just kind of seems to have that passion that I had when I was his age about it. My younger one definitely appreciates it, but not quite as passionate about it.
Sure.
So it'll be interesting to see. I don't know, no pressure on either of them to get involved at all. I want them to go their own path. If it's something they want to help out with later on, I would be happy to have either one of them help out with that.
Sure, because face it, you guys have automotive royalty name, when it really comes
Hmm.
down to it. And um, you know, it's great. It's great to know that you guys are still involved in what is Shelby, the Shelby America, Shelby Foundation, as a family. Um, and the fact that you guys are it sounds like you guys are all just kind of like, just average guys. You're just we go to work every day, and you're a banker, you got to go do bank stuff. So
Yep. No, that's it. And I think a lot of that's how we were raised, and we didn't, Carroll never, he didn't leave this to us for a reason. It wasn't because it wasn't successful. He didn't know what state it was going to be in when he passed away. I mean, as I
sure.
mentioned earlier, he was rich and poor many times in his life, and he did not want to saddle his family with any issues. Wound up, he kind of passed away, and the business was doing really well, which is great. But it gives us that opportunity to be a little more casual about it and to just enjoy it as a passion and help keep promoting it, because we knew what he wanted to last beyond his lifetime. The foundation was really critical for him, and keeping that company going, and the relationship with Ford was really important for him. And so I'm honored to be able to help carry that on. So it's an honor for me, but at the same time, it's fun. I can't lie to you. I'm having a lot of fun doing this.
How is the relationship with you guys and Ford right now? I mean, it's good, I'm assuming, right?
Oh, it's fantastic. The stuff that Ford's been doing with GT350 that just wound up last year, and the GT500 that's out now, the passion they have for developing that type of high performance vehicle and putting the Shelby name on it's a lot of fun for me to see. So when I go to Dearborn and I meet with the teams about that, not all of them, but a lot of them actually worked with Carroll on previous generations of product. And so
Hmm.
they're just excited to work on that next generation. They look at it the same way I do. Would Carroll love to be sitting in the seat right now? And that's kind of how they approach it. And it's a lot of fun for us to see that. And then what we do out of Las Vegas with the F-150 trucks, for instance, all the line of Shelby trucks that we do, that stuff's a lot of fun. And Ford helps us a lot with that. And so it's really neat for us to continue that relationship on this many years later. I've gotten to know the Edsel Ford real well, and Henry III again. He and I spent some time together in the past, and it's a lot of fun for them to hear the passion. And Edsel and Carroll were very close to each other, and so it's neat for us to carry that on.
Hey,
It's a unique relationship, I would say, in the automotive business today, because there's not many founding names that are left in any of the automotive companies, and you have two of them in both Shelby and Ford.
right, exactly, definitely. um Aaron, you now, you look back, and you just turned 50, and you look back. What is your takeaway that you have, um that you can say that your grandfather left you with? Like, what has he instilled in you, business wise, ethically, as a man? What do you think that that has had to have made an impact on you personally?
Well, I think it has, and I look at it both with Carroll and then with my father. The entrepreneurial spirit is there. While I'm a banker by day, I still look for other side projects, and I still like helping entrepreneurs. So I look for that passion, and don't be afraid to fail. I mean, I think that was probably Carroll's mantra. As I mentioned, he had caught several successful businesses, but he failed many, many more times than he ever succeeded. But it didn't dissuade him at all. He just wake up the next day and do something different. And that's a big message that I think needs to be out there. Don't be afraid to try. Go out and try it out. Maybe it works, maybe it doesn't, but at least you've tried it out and explored the opportunity out there. So to me, that's one of the biggest takeaways I get out of my history with Carroll and having looked back and watched him. It's don't be afraid to go out and try something new.
Okay, good. Hey, what's next for you? Where or do you have any plans to be showing up anywhere that people could meet you?
SEMA is coming up in Las Vegas.
Right.
I'll be out there that Wednesday and Thursday of that week. I don't have those dates right in front of me, but be around the Shelby factory most of the day on Wednesday probably, and I'll be out at the show a little bit on Thursday before I have to head back to Dallas. So that's probably the next event on my calendar. It starts to lighten up a little bit here at the end of the year. SEMA is kind of the last big event that we do, and I'm actually going to Detroit next week to meet with the Ford guys on a couple of things we're working on, but that's just a little more business oriented, not fun fun event oriented. So
Yeah. So
coming up.
yeah. So people can always jump on. I assume it's just Shelby.com. They can learn as much as they want to from what's happening in the Shelby world right now from the Shelby.com website.
Yep, most definitely. That's a great place to go. You can also, if you're, Facebook or Instagram, you've got Shelby American out there on both of those. It does a lot, or Team Shelby as well. Good things to follow out there. And then I'm on Instagram at Aaron A. Shelby. And so that's another way to kind of get about it. But we try and do a lot of announcements on Facebook and Instagram for upcoming events and things like that. So it's a good way to follow us.
Okay, good. Well, Aaron, thank you so much, man. I really appreciate you jumping on and spending, a little bit of time with us here, kind of telling us about yourself and your family and the history. And I think, everybody can appreciate it that much more having heard this. So sincerely appreciate it. Thank you so much for jumping on.
Ed, I appreciate you asking me. I've really been a lot of fun this afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, everybody. Thanks a lot. And we'll see everybody later. Thank you.